Hello. We first want to thank everyone for joining today, and we hope all of your friends, family members, and colleagues are well during this most unusual time. As we all continue to adjust to being quarantined, which I know is pretty hard, it's a moment to find a silver lining and appreciate those aspects of life that are close to our hearts. The importance of parks, nature trails, and other public spaces in improving public health and well-being are magnifying currently. And when we get back to our regular schedules, it's important we continue to expand those opportunities for our community for the near future and beyond. That being said, we're here today to share the Wild Mile with all of you and show the need for more of these models in urban environments and cities around the world, and also how the public benefits from offering spaces that have environmental immersion. We're going to begin with a short presentation, and then we'll proceed with the video afterward. I'd like to remind everyone that on the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A icon, which you can submit your questions, and then the panelists will then get to those later on in the panel. So Chicago and other urban rivers around the world were heavily trafficked with logistics and transportation, which have then shaped some of the most profound cities around the world, including Chicago. But as a community, we have a moment and more so an obligation to renaturalize our natural world. You'll see here on this shot, this is, actually go back to the previous slide. So this is actually what inspired the vision for the Wild Mile. It's our 5x10 raft that really allowed our team to think outside the box and allow us to understand what type of vision we can have for the river. Next slide. So here, this is the first install that the Urban Rivers team did among many other community members back in 2017. This install has around 1,500 square feet of new habitat, 50 plus different native species, and a couple months after we planted, about an 85% success rate of the plants coming back. Next slide. And this is obviously a more up-close shot of looking southbound or looking from the north to the south on the Wild Mile. Of course, you have the beautiful background of the Chicago skyline. But to date, we've had about 5,000 square feet, which is the best way to measure how much habitat we've added onto the river surface. You can next slide, please. So upon completing the Wild Mile Framework Plan, one of the most core principles that we all agreed on is having a wildlife-first approach to our design. And that means designing spaces that focus on the wildlife that not only was here in the past, but it was currently in the river. And also, how do we connect the designing with our community and the local habitat that we have? And this is really crucial and paramount if we want to create a beautiful destination for our residents and all of the visitors that come to Chicago. The Wild Mile showcases, in a large and complex environment, how prairies, forests, rivers, and wetlands can all coexist. How can we push the ideas to the top? And how can those ideas disrupt kind of the lens that we look through in the current day? And so this is actually a render that we've done that's near our first install, looking southbound, of course, and you can see some renders of a floating forest and some other aspects on the land construction that we want to accomplish. Go to the next slide, please. So what's next for the Wild Mile? Well, before we get into that, before we proceed to our panel, we have a short video that some of our Wild Mile stakeholders created. And again, before we get into that video, there's the Q&A icon on the bottom that can submit your questions, and you can send those in when ready.
Recent breakthroughs in biology and science have really shown us that fragmentation of habitat is causing to a depletion in species across the planet. And although we're seeing the greatest urban migration in history right now, a doubling of the world's population in the last 50 years, we've also seen a loss of animal population by over 52%. So these issues are real and they're happening right now. And projects like the Wild Mile can really demonstrate thoughtful, inventive, but also pragmatic ways in which we can see real change within many aspects of our existing cities.
before I was on this project, I didn't really have a total grasp on the sort of the importance of the river edge, but that's a huge part of everything that we're working on here, where we can focus to bring nature back is at this spot where land meets water, and it's a really important thing to understand. We're looking at taking an industrial river and making it into a recreational river, and that's not a typology unique to Chicago. I think that every big city has industrial rivers, and so I think that these ideas can most definitely be applied. I think we're the first ones though, right?
A lot of people see the Chicago River as being this really dirty, body of water, this really kind of thing that we should avoid. And so part of our community engagement was hearing from them what would attract them to come down to the river. Part of that early on was really educating the public on what the river system is, why it's important, why ecology in an urban environment is important. This stretch of the river lies within the Near North community, and actually it's a neighborhood that doesn't have very great public space. We wanted this to be their park. We wanted it to be a place where people would want to come. What we really wanted to add to this effort, and really what was the ask of the city for our help throughout this process, was to make a community vision.
Oh, that was great. Well done for all those that are involved in the video. And now that all the attendees have a solid background of the Wild Mile, I'd like to introduce our moderator for the day, Alexandre D'Amato. And again, the Q&A icon is on the bottom of your screen for any of the attendees that just came onto the panel. And I'll let Alex take it over from here.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for taking the time to join us this afternoon. I know that we're all being affected by what's going on right now, and we really appreciate the opportunity to connect with you. Everyone on the panel today has worked together to support the Wild Mile vision coming to life. We also want to give our thanks to NeighborSpace and the City of Chicago for their support in this project. At its very core, this project is about connectivity. Connecting humans with nature, connecting wildlife with habitat, and connecting people to each other. And I think now more than ever, we're more aware how important public, accessible, open spaces are to everyone. That being said, I'd like to introduce our panel. We have Nick Wesley, Urban Rivers co-founder and co-director. Rachel Mamini, SOM Senior Architectural Urban Designer. Michael Scowlin, Omni Ecosystems Director of Landscape Architecture, and Reverend Randall Blakey, Near North Unity Program Executive Director. So we'll get into the panel. We'll have a short discussion for about 30 minutes, and we'll conclude the session with a Q&A at the end. So let's get started. Thanks everybody for being here. And why are projects like this so successful in invigorating the surrounding communities? And how do these communities benefit? Randall, you've accomplished so much in your community. What in your experience has shown you how exciting this project can be?
Thank you, Ali, for that question, and thank you to all the panelists. It's been a pleasure to work with you over these last 2 years. This particular project, the Wild Mile, is pregnant with possibility and opportunity. Opportunities for wildlife to return to an area where wildlife has been dismissed, opportunities for human life to come together where human life would not even engage with each other. It is our experience most recently with the Jenner and Ogden merger that lets us know that it's projects like this that are intentional, that we have to adhere to and be a part of in order to create the type of realities that we want to experience. The reality that I'm speaking of is the reality of bringing people together who wouldn't normally have an opportunity to come together. That's what happened at during the Jenner-Ogden merger. What we're experiencing now, a very fruitful opportunity for kids from all different backgrounds to come together, to learn together, to grow together, and to be empathetic towards each other. When we began to engage this opportunity, we thought that it would be a tremendous possibility and a tremendous opportunity for us to bring that learning to the river. And we had an idea to create these floating classrooms where students throughout our community and throughout Chicago, for that matter, could come together and learn science together, meet each other, and begin to form relationship. But not only the students, their parents, the residents in our neighborhood. As I stated, this project is just pregnant with possibility and opportunity. Opportunity for the residents, opportunity for developers, opportunity for students and their parents, and opportunity for wildlife to return to the area. So our experience over the last 2 years, particularly working with the Jenner-Ogden merger, has shown us and has proven to us that it's opportunities like this that we need to be attentive to and initiate with a level of importance and a level of intentionality that is just imperative in order for us to sustain ourselves, not only as a community, but as human beings.
So true. Thank you, Randall. Nick, how have you seen the community using this site since the first gardens were installed in 2017?
Yeah, so, you know, the river it's a public trust. It's one of those things that kind of weaves through the city and everyone should be able to use it. And we start to see things like Shed Aquarium did a kayak for conservation program where they had people come down and do different wildlife monitoring, trash cleanups, and other things like that. And that was, you know, that happened for about 2 years. It was real successful and really got people kind of excited about the possibilities of what can happen. You know, you also see things like just people who are recreational kayakers discovering these areas and really staying there for quite a while and looking at these gardens and watching the different wildlife move through and throughout. So it kind of shows, you know, a lot of the potential on what could happen, you know, once we're able to get this learning platform in and make this much more accessible and much more open so that everybody can kind of have that type of experience.
Great, and the learning platform is a major feature of this park. This is an area on the Wild Mile where students and scientists can come and learn from each other.
Yeah.
So the Wild Mile offers a new approach to park design. Rachel, what makes this project unique compared to other park designs?
Yeah, sure. So as Zach mentioned earlier, the primary goal of this project from its inception was to really create and expand habitat to put wildlife first in an urban setting. And we wanted the Wild Mile to become a place to foster immersive nature experiences within the city. And so the North Branch Canal, what we're calling the Wild Mile today, is a man-made channel with really hard edges and not unlike many urban rivers. But this mile-long stretch really offers the opportunity to create habitat installations along those hard edges that will help to enhance and restore the riparian and emergent landscapes that would naturally exist between the land and the water level in a healthy river environment. And that's a type of habitat that really is almost non-existent in our urban area today. And so we wanted to be able to foster this type of ecosystem for people to learn about, to really create a relationship with. So as Randall mentioned, this plan doesn't focus on the water alone, but really how it connects back to the Near North community and its 40+ educational institutions. So we see the Wild Mile as a living laboratory for testing out this habitat, these types of different installations, how they perform, and then how they could be deployed in other areas of the river. In addition, as mentioned by Randall, we see this mile-long stretch of the river also as an outdoor classroom for students and community to learn and engage.
Great. I think it's so important to highlight the fact that the approach to this park was habitat first, and just have us thinking about the way that we interact with open space. And I know that that is even changing now with, you know, the air that we're breathing, the spaces we're inhabiting, and it's just so important and so necessary right now. So, yeah. So, why is it important to restore Chicago's rivers and urban ecology? I'm going to direct this question towards Michael.
Oh, Mike, you're muted.
Got it. Thanks. When we start projects, it's what we do as designers or as landscape architects is we look back at what was on that land before it was really developed or heavily occupied by people, and then we look at, you know, what is it, or what was it in its height of occupation, and the urban rivers in Chicago, and it's interesting because every city or every big city really has an urban river, but this hasn't been done to this magnitude before. So what we're looking at doing is telling the story of, you know, of what the landscape of this area and of this river core used to be, and bring that back. When people in industry sort of took it over 100 years ago, they made hard wall edges along the river, and this is literally a channel at this point. And what we're learning is that really has disintegrated a natural ecosystem and a diversity of animals and habitat that is crucial for just healthy life. So when we're looking at different ways of restoring urban ecology and bringing back, you know, a healthy environment, it's just so critical to look at the river systems and recognize that there was such an abundance of life there at one time, and now we can bring that back by these innovative, creative ways of integrating floating habitat, bringing an edge back to a hard-walled river that hasn't been a natural edge, really, in a new way that hasn't been there in over 100 years. So.
Yeah. Mike, can you follow up just on some of the specific ways that, you know, the specific edge conditions, I guess, in the river, and the different ways, you know, that the Wild Mile can kind of transform some of those or augment them?
Yeah, and that was one of the most challenging things when we started this project, was to really kind of survey. I mean, it's a 1 mile stretch, you know, 2 miles if you got both sides, and to survey the existing conditions along the edge on this stretch of the river. We have a sheet wall, like a metal wall that goes down. That's quite typical. Then there's other areas where that wall might be sort of degraded, and it's more or less riprap or rock that kind of comes down at an easier angle into that water. And then there's other areas where it's a wood wall or something else, concrete wall. So when we're looking at bringing that edge back, it's where land meets water. So that's such a fragile environment. It's like the most fragile environment. And when that land and water isn't combined by anything but a vertical wall, you're losing that edge or that bio or the emergent ecosystem. So what we're looking at doing in a lot of these is putting floating gardens into, so tethering them to the wall, so that garden effectively kind of steps a living system down from it might be 10 feet from the land side to the water side, but by integrating a floating garden, we're actually stepping this down. And then there's other ways where we're actually proposing where the sheet wall might not be, where maybe it was more a gravel or a riprap edge, where we can maybe peel that back and access the water at a more gradual slope. But there are a lot of different conditions and a lot of different strategies that we've been studying and deploying throughout the course of this framework.
Yeah, to just add to that quickly, Mike, so there are sort of, I guess, this sort of menu of options that we created through this process that lent themselves to applying habitat to the different existing conditions. And throughout this project, we worked with a whole host of experts rather. So teams of ecologists from the Shedd Aquarium, from the Urban Wildlife Institute at Lincoln Park Zoo, and other groups to really create this robust library of habitat options that we could add to the edge conditions. So from those groups, we really learned about, what species of animals, plants, that whole thing, that are in the area that they would like to see return to the area, that need help in the area. There are all these different categories, and that we were able to then kind of focus on them through different strategies of either habitat implementation or focusing on certain plant species that could be deployed somewhere or what have you. But so in our framework vision report that we put out last year, within that we have the habitat matrix that kind of breaks down these different opportunities, as well as an associated plant palette that is quite extensive and includes, I think, almost exclusively native species for the area. And that was done in conjunction with our consultants, Tetra Tech, that allow people to choose which habitat should be deployed where and what species should be implemented within those. So it's a great tool, and it can be found on the city's website. If you just look up WildMA Chicago, you're able to find a copy of the report and check that out for yourselves. Because if you're in a situation where you live on the river or you have some control over a river's edge, these are different opportunities that you could potentially deploy as well.
Yeah, I think it is important to recognize that these are whole systems. It's like a big food web. So if you want to get otters, for instance, it doesn't start with that, right? It starts with the little bugs in the muck, and it works all the way up to insects and bigger animals. So it is quite complex to rebuild an ecosystem. It's a lot of flora and a lot of fauna that goes into it.
That's a really good point. It is really complex, but it's so necessary to start the conversation, and hopefully the WildMA project will be used as a tool for, other river edges, other cities to improve the ecosystem and restore the ecosystem. So Nick, I'd like to ask you, how do you think the Wild Mile can be used as a template or a model for other cities?
Yeah, I mean, kind of as Mike alluded to, you know, there's most cities or many cities have some sort of urban river system that goes through. And most of those are modeled off kind of a similar principle of these steel edges that were useful to move goods, you know, throughout in the early 20th century. And, you know, now that use is kind of gone. We have highways and other ways to move things kind of efficiently through urban areas. So all these cities are left with a similar kind of architectural relic of these steel sheet pile walls, these kind of hard edges and things like that. So, you know, this project really gives an opportunity to show how one could augment those in a way that benefits both, you know, humans and wildlife, and really take this unused space in many instances, or underused space, and turn it into public parks and nature preserves and other things like that. So, you know, when we got into this, one of the things that we found challenging was showing other projects that were similar to what we were talking about. You know, it was difficult to, you know, especially getting permits and other things like that, getting people to really wrap their heads around what this is and how it would actually work in a city. So by, you know, embarking on this project, I think it really provides a great example that, you know, other cities throughout the world could use, copy, and enhance and suit their own local environments to really create this necessary ecological corridor within, you know, some of these densely populated areas.
Yeah, and what we're showing in this project is kind of a light touch kit of parts, which can be deployed many different places. You know, just change out the species that are, you know, relative for those, you know, climate zones or whatever. But it's something that can be easy. It's an easy win. But, you know, where there are opportunities to actually create a naturalized edge by taking down those sheet pile walls, making a more gradual transition from land to water's edge, would be an even bigger win, because what we're seeing in cities throughout the world due to, you know, climate change and other issues are issues of flooding, as well as habitat depletion. So by creating these sort of green buffers along rivers' edges, we can also help to absorb that stormwater runoff, help to slow down the river systems, and hopefully help to eliminate some of those flash floods that can occur in areas where there are channelized rivers. You know, I think of one project specifically up in Milwaukee along the Kinnickinnic River. They've historically had a channelized river system that has caused devastating floods in some of their more urbanized, poor areas. And the MWRD there has taken on the challenge of expanding the buffer of that river system to create a naturalized area that can help to absorb the flooding issues, as well as to create recreational areas for those community members. So, you know, what we've been doing in the Wild Mile is to kind of try and figure out how we can best deploy habitat in the easiest ways. But we're hoping that it's a starting point and something we can build up from as our rivers become less industrialized and less necessary for, you know, boat transit of goods and things like that.
Yeah, that's it's interesting to, when you look at the framework plan, how complex these systems are, especially in a city. And it's just in the history of the area and what it used to be and what we're, you know, there's this huge movement towards trying to restore that is really just really inspiring and such important work. And I want to thank all of you for, you know, being involved in it. I know that I learned so much from this process. Every day you're finding something new out on the river, different different animals that you see popping up, different ticks in wildlife that we've seen just since the installation of this project in 2017. It really is working and bringing back wildlife. So I'd like to open up the panel to any questions from our audience here. And okay, so we've got a few here. How are you engaging large stakeholders like ComEd?
So I could probably, I don't know, elaborate on one specific one, not necessarily ComEd, but I know, for instance, like you have the waste management, which is right along the edge there. And so they have, on Goose Island, they have a transfer facility. So when you recycle goods or whatnot, it goes there and then gets sorted and moved out to other places. And, you know, one of the interesting things of this whole project is it's not just like a regular park where you just buy a chunk of land and then you kind of have free reign to do it. It's really integrated within a bunch of different stakeholders, including property owners like Waste Management, places like Whole Foods, Carpet Paint, REI, and others. So talking to them, getting consensus, figuring out what, you know, first the concerns are, but really what their hopes are for the area and how, you know, you can build a project that helps solve some of the problems that they might be having in the area is one really good way to really engage these people. And so far, I mean, we've, you know, there's never been anyone any of the stakeholders so far along the edge who's really not wanted something like this to happen. You know, it comes as something where, you know, everyone from, you know, one of the small businesses to the area, the community, the residents, and then even the, you know, the large industrial places like Waste Management, you know, really like the idea of this happening and have kind of wanted to see the river transform in a positive way. So it becomes, you know, easier to build a consensus and really engage these people when, you know, the project that they see is something that, you know, they kind of want to happen.
Yeah, and there were a number of stakeholders along with community members that we reached out to and engaged during the framework visioning process. Many of the adjacent property owners, as well as business owners in the area, we reached out to and got their feedback upfront before kind of creating this document that would lead the implementation of the Wild Mile moving forward. So we have a lot of voices wrapped into that report, but Urban Rivers, who kind of been working to lead the implementation of this project along with the city and neighbor space, have been doing a great job of keeping those lines of communication open and reaching out to stakeholders as they emerge. And, you know, we see this project is being incremental in its approach. And so I think there are many different ways for different stakeholders to get engaged as this project progresses as well. And one thing I was thinking about is that maybe one of the Urban Rivers folks, either Nick or Zach, you could give us a little update of kind of city funding, what's been happening, because I don't think that was really addressed too much in the beginning. So I think people are just kind of gunning for a little bit of an update on what things are happening.
Yeah, no, totally. So a lot's been happening, to say the least. You know, the city, through the open space impact fee, was able to put a sizable chunk of money to build out this learning platform, you know, with our team, Neighbor Space, and Near North Unity program. And so, you know, we're right now in the midst of getting different docs, which are hopefully going to be put in this summer and really start to get the process of allowing people to actually access the Wild Mile and see this first phase. So this will include, you know, gardens along the edge, the learning platform, and floating classroom where students and full classes of students will be able to actually go down to the river and learn about it and engage with it and really create this kind of cool opportunity. So, you know, it's moving forwards in a pretty interesting way. And, you know, using the kind of vision set out in the framework, we're able to really kind of crystallize this first aspect of it and continue building out and trying to get this whole mile wild again.
Cool.
Great.
Yeah.
I've got a question for you, Randall. What has been the most gratifying element of this project for the Near North Unity program?
Oh, by far the most gratifying part has been the embrace of the community, both from urban rivers, from neighbor space, from the city of Chicago. When I was first approached, when the Near North Unity program was first approached about this opportunity and about this project, what was asked was how could the community be involved and what would the community's interest be? And every time we've convened the community and asked that question and given that feedback to the team has incorporated all of that into the planning process. Last summer, we were trying to get kids together to help, or not to help, but to assist urban rivers with the implementation of those first docks. This summer, we'll be doing the same thing as that equipment comes in and arrives there on the river. But I would hasten to say that it's the futuristic aspect of the potential that this project or a project like this has that is extremely gratifying, because looking into the future, you can see how residents in our community who've lived there literally for years and who have not known each other or had opportunities to know each other will have an opportunity to meet on the river, to learn on the river, and to form relationship on the river. And so the relational aspects of this project has been most gratifying, not only for me, but also for the North Unity program. Our mission is to connect and convene residents and stakeholders in our diverse community, enhances growth, and improve the quality of life for all being the operative word. And so with that mission, what we're doing, it encompasses all of that. And we're very pleased with how it's going thus far.
Great. I'm going to read a few comments. As a resident, this is my first introduction to this project. It sounds amazing. What are the next steps? What are the blockers? Do we have funding? I know we've touched on all of those topics, but I think that the answer to that is that we have funding, but we need a significant amount more to spread this project is for the entire mile and to bring this to other areas of the city. And I'd like to know from the panel, are there plans to bring this to other areas of Chicago?
Well, so, you know, part of the, kind of mission of the project is to really lead the world in this thing and to show how other places can do these. So, you know, our river is really, is a majority of this steel sheet pile wall. So the opportunity to take these concepts and put them in places like Bubbly Creek, put them in some of these different boat slips on the south side or different areas, you know, from the very north side to the, all the way through Calumet, I think is there. You know, it really just depends on the exact space and, you know, kind of the specifics on how it would be executed. But, you know, hopefully that as we start to put these things in, it becomes apparent what to do, and the playbook really starts to get written on how exactly you maintain these things, how exactly you install these things. You know, what does how do you engage the community in those areas to really make sure that these things are able to be utilized? So, you know, there's not a direct plan to put these anywhere else, but that's definitely something that it's definitely one of the reasons why this project exists in the first place, is to really showcase that and have other places and really rethink how they use the river.
Hey, Allie, I'd like to that. Just I'm sorry. Go ahead, Rachel.
Oh, I just wanted to follow up on that. So we do call the Wild Mile the sort of test bed of innovation for habitat to be deployed in urban rivers. And since the vision has come out and since we have been testing these floating wetland rafts on the water's surface, we have had interested people reach out to us about deploying them in other areas of the city. As many of you know, there are major developments happening to the south of this project as well as to the north. Both are all located on the river, and they create opportunities for deploying these ideas elsewhere. And something that's built into the zoning for the city of Chicago is when you're doing a project along the water's edge, you need to leave at least a 30-foot setback to create a public edge. And the city has created a new set of guidelines for what that river edge should look like. And many of the ideas that we've been deploying in the Wild Mile have been wrapped into those guidelines. So, I mean, it's a very hopeful future for any development that's taking place along the river that would begin to include some of these ideas that we've been working on.
I just wanted to follow up on something that Michael alluded to earlier. That is, this river project has to be viewed as a whole system. So it's just not the Wild Mile that we're looking at. We're looking at the entire river channel that goes throughout the city, both north and south of where we're speaking, and that's the way that the city is viewing this. And so when we make decisions on the Wild Mile, those decisions are in concert with potential decisions that will be made to the south and to the north of us, because we have to consider the river system as a whole system. We're just a part of that system. And so we've engaged a number of the CBOs, the community-based organizations, to the south of us and to the north of us to begin to think about how or what access to the river would look like in their particular community.
Yeah, it's a really good point to bring up. And I'd like to ask, what kind of work is being done to tie the existing Riverwalk designs near the downtown area and the loop? And what kind of influence do you hope to have on the work that's already been completed on the Riverwalk, and how those two systems will connect?
So, I mean, the part of the goal is to make this kind of continuous river edge or continuous river walk, I guess, along the whole river, you know, from north to south. I think that, you know, it's cool because the loop and the Riverwalk down there has kind of a purpose that's different than the Wild Mile, which is, I think, a cool way to kind of cross-pollinate ideas. You know, you have an area where you have just huge amounts of foot traffic. You know, the river itself was all channelized. There wasn't really nature in it. Now you kind of add this new thing where it has, you know, green space and other things like that, which is a really cool way to kind of engage. And then, you know, for our section, it was a really different kind of concept. You know, the Goose Island area was zoned as industrial for a long time, still to most extent is. But you had then, you know, warehouses and other things which kind of line the edge and block it out. They don't see the river as an amenity. They see it as just something that they build up to and then kind of don't really look at. And so now as that area is changing, and, you know, part of the impetus of the project is really to take this thing that was left to nature, that was just kind of ignored and grew in its own unique way, and then take some of the best features and enhance them and increase the wildlife. So it's somewhat of a different, I guess, different environment. But I think the thing that, you know, we'll start to see more in further development of, you know, the Riverwalk and other areas is more of an inclusion of the natural habitat that's in the river, and really trying to figure out ways to engage that and foster that to create these kind of unique experiences that you can't really find in the river. You know, if you're able to build habitat for different bird species, for different fish species and insects and things like that, you then start to see things that you are not normally familiar when you're looking at, kind of an urban landscape. So I think that's something that, we'll definitely start to see more of.
Yeah, and just, I think part of that question was maybe about connectivity of these systems as well. And so, I mean, there is a vision for the broader city, the different groups, the Active Transportation Alliance, others have been looking at, how to connect these recreational systems throughout the city. So say you could get all the way from the north down to the southern branch of the river by trail system or what have you. And it's a bit of a patchwork. So this, as Nick said, is one experience, and the Riverwalk in the Loop is another experience. But hopefully as new development comes online between us and that portion of the river, it can be connected through new river walks that get developed. For areas that won't be redeveloped, there might be a better way to continue to connect, but at street level, or by, beautifying different sections of the different streets or corridors. But I think as we move forward, there could be a larger initiative for signage and wayfinding to connect all points of this river system from north all the way south. So unfortunately, it's not going to be one consistent path as we would love it to be, but you should be able to pleasantly get from one place to another one day along the river's edge.
Yeah, I wanted to add in too, like this stuff isn't straightforward because the river, the Army Corps of Engineers is in charge of that river from side to side, and really, so we're working with the Army Corps, and they're being very supportive of what we're doing in the Wild Mile. So I think, it's not like we can just do a huge floating eco park overnight. Like, it takes time and it's bit by bit, but it's really about, like, the proof is in the pudding. So the city is our client. They put this team together, and they're so much props to them, because they understand that the only way to get something like this off the ground is to make it a community-led effort. And so when the community is behind this, and then the federal government's behind it, and the city's behind it, then you start, really gaining momentum, and that's how this is it's going to happen and going to be implemented. So.
Yeah. What are some of the challenges you expect to face as this project moves forward? Some of the biggest hurdles that that are still yet to be overcome for the future of this project?
Yeah, I mean, there's different ones, and they kind of evolve over time. I mean, like, we have currently, we're in the midst of a pandemic, which is something that any of the planning that we did not incorporate at all. It's just something that there's these things that sometimes that just happen, and it just creates new challenges and new opportunities for kind of how you kind of move through. But and I expect different ones and different things to kind of happen like that, different challenges that we just aren't expecting us to kind of work through. But currently, one of the big ones that we found was kind of just the regulatory framework of it. It's as Mike was saying, it's regulated by the Army Corps. You need different permits from the IDNR, CDOT, Coast Guard, IEPA in order to actually do anything in there. And for us, when we put the install in 2017 in, it was previous to that, it was about 2 years to actually get all the permits and to first figure out what all the permits necessary were, and then to actually kind of go through with them. And then now with this next phase of the learning platform, you know, we're going beyond the scope of what is kind of allowed in the current framework, or not necessarily beyond the scope of what's allowed, but we have to go, we have to kind of get more, I guess, approval, different types of approval to really extend out as far out into the river as we want. So, you know, you start to find these challenges of really first kind of engaging this in a new way, really kind of setting the path for how these agencies are able to actually allow something like this to happen, and how do they kind of put their oversight and expertise to use. So that's been definitely a challenge, but, you know, it's also, you know, everyone in these agencies too kind of wants to see this happen. So it's been just a process that has to be worked through, and really kind of, so that's one thing that's been difficult. But yeah, I think that there's also more that will kind of come up as things move through, as we start, you know, really building this out, managing this, and really getting kind of the community involved.
Ali,
Yeah,
this is not a challenge, but rather a asset. It's also important to point out that MWRD is also very supportive of this project. President Steele and her team have been meeting on a semi-regular basis to discuss and to plan for different aspects of this project from a governance standpoint of view, an implementation standpoint of view. And they have been extremely instrumental with also convening the Army Corps and working with the Army Corps as it relates to this project. So having partners like MWRD and the ones that Nick has mentioned and referred to is imperative to seeing this through.
Yeah, just to follow up on that a little bit, as Nick mentioned before, when we were starting this project, there weren't a lot of precedents to look to or case studies in terms of permitting a project like this, floating walkway and ecosystem on a river, on a working river, on a navigable waterway. So there's a lot of kind of firsts that have been happening with this project. And I think a process is beginning to develop. And I think, as Nick mentioned, there will be more firsts that come as we develop further. So, you know, not all process has been seen. You know, not all the fruits of the labor is visible yet in the wild mile, and it's coming to fruition, but there's a lot of legwork that has to happen in getting the right groups together, the right people on board with the project, and the right permitting agencies in sync. So props to Urban Rivers and crew for spearheading all of that.
It was a blast.
Was a blast. It's still a blast. So as far as this year, I know that we're all shifting, pausing, pivoting on what our plans have been for, you know, this summer of 2020. Can you talk about what our plans were for the 2020 install, or what they are, subject to change given
Oh yeah, I mean, so, you know, the learning platform, so the first, I guess, phase kind of laid out in the Wild Mile is this loop between like Eastman and Weed Street. So creating this walkway that goes from the REI dock to the end of the Whole Foods on Weed Street. You can then start to have this kind of area where people can kind of connect between. So that's really the next kind of phase into it. You know, adding this learning platform, which is, you know, you could bring classroom of students down to actually learn about the river, to add these different habitat modules and other things is what kind of the goal for this year is to reach from basically from the REI new kayak launch connected down to the middle of Blackhawk Street. So, you know, it's I think it'll give a great taste of how this type of project will feel, and what you know it is like to actually be immersed in nature while on river level.
Yeah, and that's introducing a loop now to what you started doing, was it 3 years ago now, maybe? But it's building off of itself.
Can you elaborate a little bit on some of the design challenges that have come up, not just the permitting, but how you're thinking about the walkway and the gardens when you're talking about bringing people down to a park that's floating on the water?
Yeah, that's that's the hardest part, right? So this, whenever we're working on the river, it's a study through section, and by that I mean the sort of the rest of the city is operating at street level, and then the river might be like 10 feet lower. So the sort of the largest physical barrier there is that 10 feet grade differential, and this is, you know, this is designed to be accessible by all. So it's not as though stairs are the answer for everything. I think the means for sort of traversing that street down to that water by different ramp conditions or different stair conditions or anything else it is a big challenge. But yeah, I think that's the biggest one. The other one is honestly still that the river, you know, up to the sheet wall that is dictated by Army Corps of Engineers. So it was sort of you know, this light bulb, I think, when we all understood that we can bridge the land to the water by integrating a floating something, and that floating something can be modular. And what that does is it allows us to do something today, and we can actually you know, bring ecology and bring life to that edge today. We don't have to wait to tear down a wall, for instance, or wait to get the river deauthorized, for instance. But that flexibility in and of itself allows us, you know, if we ever did need to move that, it's a tethered module. I don't anticipate that would be the case, but that is a flexible system. And the other thing with that module is that we can grow it, right? So as we get more funding, more momentum, we can actually continue that module up and down the corridor, continue it into the river system, and make it something quite phenomenal. So.
Yeah. And I want to add, because I know there was a question on the estimated completion date. And I think this kind of, Mike, you kind of hit something that's correct, is, you know, it's a modular layout, so as time goes, it grows, it can change, it can evolve to what needs. So, you know, it doesn't really have a hard end date right now. You know, we're really trying to build this first loop, learn, change for the next one, and really get this whole thing built out. But there's not, it's not like on 2022, it's done. It'll really keep evolving, and that's one of the benefits too. You know, you have something like, you know, the Riverwalk and the Loop, where it's set in concrete, it's kind of there, and that's what it is. Where this has a lot more options, and you know, as people use it, as you know, you kind of see what works and what doesn't work. You can change it, you can expand parts of it, you can make other parts more intimate, and kind of adapt to what the you know, the optimal design would be for both people and habitat.
Yeah, well, it looks like we're just a little bit over time here. So maybe we should think about wrapping it up and letting people get on with their next Zoom call, virtual meeting, or other necessary at-home things that they need to do.
All right, everyone. Well, I want to thank everyone again for taking the time to connect with us today. For more information, you can go to check out urbanriv.org or wildmile.org. We'll be sending everyone a follow-up email with the link to today's panel. And please stay tuned for the next panel. We plan on doing a few more of these. So thanks, everybody. Happy birthday, Steph. And we will be connecting with all of you guys soon.
Okay.
Thank you.
Bye. Thank you for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.